Welcome to New West Press Audio, the official podcast of New West Press. We're an independent publishing outfit located in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. My name is Matt Bose. I'm the general manager here at New West, and with me today is Frances Peck, author of the debut novel, The Broken Places. How are you today, Frances?
I'm doing really well, Matt. Thanks. How are things with you in Edmonton?
Snow is slowly going away. It's a little bit chilly today, but seems like the winter is coming to a close. So we're on like the second false spring, and then we'll have one big more dump of snow, and then we'll be over. So ideally, we're getting close. I'm sure Vancouver is what, 5 degrees? So it's about as cold as you guys ever get, huh?
You would think so, but I'll tell you, I was up early this morning, maybe 7 o'clock Pacific time, looked out my window at the rain and it was snow. So
No.
I freaked out a little bit, but it has stopped. We've gone back to normal Vancouver now. We had an Edmonton moment there.
Yeah, no, I don't think it would ever get full Edmonton. If Vancouver ever got to minus 37 with wind chill, I feel like the world would be ending, which is kind of interesting considering what your book is about, actually. So your book, The Broken Places, is in our Nunatak First Fiction Series. So this is number 57 in the series. So this is our series of either short story collections or novels by first-time authors. And do you want to let our listeners know what this book is about?
Yeah, sure. Well, it's not a spoiler to say it's about an earthquake rocking Vancouver. And it is about the earthquake and the physical devastation and how the city responds. But beyond that, and more than that, probably, it is a book about a group of characters who are caught up in the earthquake. So they get thrown together, most of them inadvertently, in a waterfront mansion in West Vancouver, an affluent neighborhood. And a couple of them have loved ones who are in far-flung locations outside the city. So the book is about the tensions that simmer inside the mansion and the relationships, the dynamics going on there, and also the question of whether those characters will be reunited with their loved ones who are outside the city. So it's a multiple point of view novel told from, these various points of view of the different characters. And I like to think of it as primarily character driven, but with, some good sprinkles of disaster in there too, just to keep things interesting.
Yeah. So Kyle, he's kind of the only one who can really understand the scope of what's going on, because he's actually going hiking up some difficult mountain trail and can actually see the sort of devastation that's happening to the city from that elevation. But everyone else, since they're stuck at pretty close to sea level, I guess, they can really only see what's going on around them, which I thought was a good metaphor for many impending crises, or just many ways that people get stuck with tunnel vision. But let's talk a little bit about the earthquake, because this is one that people have been saying is going to happen for years. And I remember there was a good article in the Atlantic about it. I think we talked about that. There was an article about the Cascadia Fault and how we should all be worried about it. But do you want to go into your thought process a bit about thinking about the earthquake and natural disasters in general and how we perceive them?
Sure. Well, I'm a transplant to Vancouver. I'm from Nova Scotia originally. Spent a lot of time living in Ottawa, though, where actually I did experience a couple of really minor earthquakes, because there are some faults that run through the Ottawa Valley, unbeknownst to many. But when I first moved to Vancouver,
unbeknownst to me, I don't know. That's
there
amazing.
you go. Surprise, surprise. No, I remember being in a basement apartment when I was a student, and even in the basement, like, I felt this tremoring going on. I thought, whoa, it was a Saturday night. I did think, was that induced by something going on in my social life or whatever? But no, it turned out the next morning they were reporting that there'd been an earthquake. But when I moved to Vancouver, of course, everybody who lives on the coast here is aware, some more than others. I mean, for many, it's something that's in the forefront of their lives and they're very prepared. And for others, it's something that they tuck away in a deep closet inside themselves. They don't really want to confront the reality of it. But the earthquake is a reality here, of course. And And so that was a new thing for me as a transplant to the area, thinking about earthquake and thinking about the possibility of it. And when the idea for the book came to me, of course, I had to do a lot of research into earthquakes, what would happen, what's likely to happen. I wanted the earthquake part of the book to be realistic.
Hmm.
And I actually ended up having to change my idea. So initially, the book was going to be about the big one, which is the name that we give to the ripping apart of the Cascadia Fault. And that
Yeah.
is the one that, yeah, pretty much everybody along the west coast of North America fears. But I went, a certain distance with the manuscript with that in mind. Then I got this idea, I should actually talk to somebody who knows something about earthquakes, who hasn't just read about them on Wikipedia and, looked at videos and stuff. So I had a few meetings with Professor John Clegg from Simon Fraser University. He's our local go-to guy on anything seismic. That's his area of expertise. And through chatting with him, I realized for purposes of my book, the big one was not the right earthquake to write about. So the reason for that is the big one is going to happen off the coast of British Columbia. And
Right.
what will take the brunt of it is actually the west coast of Vancouver Island, because that's
Yeah.
going to be the closest. Vancouver Island actually acts like this buffer for the lower mainland, for the Vancouver area. And so we would certainly feel effects of the big one, but it would not be the most catastrophic kind of earthquake that we might experience. So I asked John Clegg, well, what would be really catastrophic for Vancouver? So we went through various scenarios and settled
How do
on
we really give it to Vancouver?
that's it. That's pretty much it. So that's how I came up with
Huh.
the technical kind of earthquake, which is a shallow crustal quake, for any who might be interested.
I mean, that doesn't sound so bad, but having read the book, I know that it is very bad. So,
Well,
congrats.
yeah, the funny thing, I know what you're saying, like the word shallow, that sounds
Hmm.
benign almost, and crustal, well, who the heck knows what that means? But
Sounds kind of gross, actually.
it does, yeah, exactly. Mucousy things and
Yeah.
blood and scabs and all that. Evocative in its own way, I guess. But the fact is that if you have a shallow crustal quake, and in the case of my book, it's basically in the center of Georgia Strait, kind of like
Hmm.
right between Vancouver Island and Vancouver. If that were to happen and it were shallow, the thing is that there's not a lot of earth around it to absorb, if you will, the shock waves that happen. I'm probably using
Hmm.
incorrect terminology. I'm not a seismologist, but in other words, there's the force is unleashed in a less muffled way, if you like, and would hit Vancouver in ways that would result in a lot of destruction. And yeah, that's what I was going for. This was pre-pandemic that I wrote all this. It's not like we had not yet been buffeted by disaster, which we have been now. I don't know if I was writing the book now, I wonder if I would be looking for something gentler.
Would you, I know this is a topic that a lot of people are thinking about. And actually, another book we have coming out this season takes place in Vancouver. It's called To Those Who Killed Me. And I was the editor on that one. I worked with the author, and he wants to kind of work COVID in to the next one. So we specifically picked, okay, this one takes place in 2018 into 2019. And then anything else is going to happen probably 2021, 2022. So we can kind of work that in, although those dates are shifting, of course. But yeah, do you think that if you wrote it now, would you work in COVID? Because that's going to be a defining event for all of us. And are we going to want it to real experience it in fiction, or are we going to want to just forget about it?
That is such a good question. I don't even, I really don't know if I can answer that. It's well, I did have to face the question of COVID to some extent with this book, with The Broken Places, because the bulk of the book, of course, takes place actually in a somewhat unspecified time. Never in the book are readers told exactly what year it is, though careful readers can take some clues. For example, one of the characters, Anna, is from Ukraine. and she fled Ukraine to Canada
Yeah, how
during
did you
the
predict that too?
well, and not predicted though, because of course
Yeah,
there really was the invasion of
yeah,
Ukraine by Russia that took place. How many years ago now? I guess about 8 years ago. And
yeah.
so, if you kind of put together the chronology of her fleeing Ukraine and some of the Ukrainian conflict of that time, you could figure out that basically the book takes place probably in about 2018. So it's
Yeah.
similar to Jeremy's book that in that respect.
But you could
But
also push it forward now that there is a new invasion of Ukraine.
yeah, it's true. It could happen. But so at the end of The Broken Places, though, there's an epilogue that pushes
Hmm.
everything 10 years ahead. And I wrote that, of course, pre-COVID. But then when we were getting the book ready for publication, COVID had hit. And suddenly there was this question, okay, if the main action happens in 2018 or thereabouts, 10 years from then would be 2028, and COVID would have happened. And the epilogue is basically kind of a retrospective of what has happened in Vancouver over the 10 years since the big one, the big
Hmm.
earthquake, not the big one, but the big earthquake that rocked Vancouver. And so the question then was, okay, well, if this is to be realistic fiction, then do we say, well, COVID happened in there? And that was something else that Vancouver had to come back from, as well as the earthquake. But then I thought, but if we name COVID, then everybody knows that the COVID part is real, but the earthquake part is not real. And it
Yeah.
forces you out of the story in a way, it seemed to me. So in the end, I just dealt with it by, I guess, treating the book as speculative fiction
Hmm.
entirely. And this is not a spoiler, I don't think, but in that 10-year retrospective, there are a couple of references to the time of sickness that
Hmm.
occurred. And I changed it. I put some details, like it's a sickness that actually affects the environment to some extent, as well as just people. It's not clear, is it a virus or what is it? So I
Hmm.
just went really vague on that as a way of covering off COVID without calling it COVID.
Yeah. Well, you can't be expected to predict everything, even though don't write about me in a book because Ukraine happened again. And like it's difficult when you're doing that sort of near future type stuff because the near future, especially with the glacial timeline of publishing, becomes the current present day faster than you think. Something I want to think about with this book is tying into a lot of other books actually we've done lately about Vancouver. We've done a ton of Vancouver books lately. And it's weird because we're headquartered in Edmonton, but we've been finding so many Vancouver authors talking about their city in different ways. And something that I'm sure you thought about quite a bit, but is more subtextual in the story, is the idea of like real estate. The backdrop to everything I've seen in Vancouver, basically real estate, people's anxiety towards finding a home, rich people, that kind of thing. And the main house that they're stuck in is kind of built in such a way that it's able to handle it, but it's also kind of on the firing line, if you know what I mean. Like it's kind of like it's in a tricky place. And I thought that this was kind of a metaphor for a lot of rich people buying land in Vancouver and building palaces and building and changing the city to make it what they want, whereas it's not really becoming a city that your average person can live in anymore. And an earthquake is a very good example of, well, how this levels everybody, literally levels everybody. So I just want to know, that was a rambling explanation, but um, do you see your book as reflecting current anxieties apart from the imminent threat of earthquakes? Because I think it is, and I'm curious to see what you think.
Definitely. I think you've really nailed it. I mean, it is always a topic of conversation here in the Lower Mainland, the Vancouver and greater area. Real estate,
Mm-hmm.
whether you own a property, you rent a property, you have kids who are trying to rent or to buy, you need to live with a bunch of roommates in order to afford where you live. It's a preoccupation. And yeah, the house where so much of the action takes place it's a mansion on the waterfront of West Vancouver. So it is in a kind of a tenuous position. I mean, if a tsunami hits, it's possibly right there, In terms of climate change, we know that shorelines are changing and so on. So people who've paid enormous sums of money to live on the ocean front, are they thinking about that? Or are they just thinking about the short-term gratification and status of living in such a place without considering the longer-term consequences? But the other thing about that house is it's a strong house, and it holds together well enough, obviously, for the characters to shelter within it and for their stories to unfold within it. And on the one hand, you could say, yeah, that's a benefit of being wealthy, that you can build a place that will withstand an earthquake and that will stay solid.
Literally insulate yourself against
Exactly.
everything.
Exactly. Yeah. While the rest of the world just crumbles around you. But when you look at what happens inside that house, both before the earthquake, when you look at the dynamics of the Stedman family that occupies the house, Stedman being a wealthy tycoon, and then his wife, who's a highly ambitious career woman, definitely overly committed, and their daughter, Sydney. It's a home belonging to wealthy, privileged people, and a home that is strong in its construction, but it houses a family on the brink of crumbling. And so, and I think for me that was important. The facade around them is just that, it's a facade.
Yeah, people say that, oh, this house has good bones, and in one sense, yes, this does, because it's like new build. I think there's a lot of concrete too, if I remember right. Like it's that sort of like new style of the house building that takes into account timblers and everything, but also the people who live in it, those bones are rotten, that they're not interacting well anymore and are not interested in really hanging out with each other. So here's a question that writers hate. Who's your favorite character in the book? Because I have mine, but I'm curious to know yours.
I know, it's like picking your favorite sibling or something, or who did you love more, your mom or your dad, right? We don't feel we can answer it. I'm going to hedge my answer a little bit, Matt, I guess, by saying it was really, it became apparent to me early in the writing of the book that it was a multiple point of view book. There were just these various voices that wanted to be heard. So it's, I don't know, polyphonic that way, I guess. And I felt that was important, I guess, just because what I wanted was to explore how a disaster like an earthquake would affect different types of people at different levels of society, different genders, different sexual orientations at different stages in their lives, et cetera, et cetera. So it was really important to hear from those characters directly. But I don't know, my heart is probably most with Joe, I have to say, and secondarily maybe with Anna. Anna really grew on me in earlier drafts. She was, I think, not as well-rounded as she became. And I found that the more actually that I was researching the Ukrainian conflict, the earlier Ukrainian conflict, and just looking at what happened there and how it affected people who were just trying to live their lives in Ukraine. And suddenly the bully Russia comes yet again and tries to take them over. I really came to sympathize a lot with her too.
My favorite's Kyle. I like characters who are always kind of screwing themselves over, but for their own like enjoyment, basically. Like he's going on this sort of I forget the name of that trail.
The famous trail is the Grouse Grind, but he's not.
The Grouse Grind, yeah.
He's not doing that one though. He's going up something that's actually longer and ultimately more arduous. So he's climbing up to Eagle Bluffs and going beyond that up to Black Mountain.
Yeah. So he's like punishing himself with, to me, not a very athletic person, what seems something horrible. I don't know why you do that to yourself, but he's also sort of dealing with his own relationship issues and, maybe interested in people outside of his circle. So he's on a high wire all the time, but then he's like kind of that sort of classic Canadian survivalist mode, because he has to really get out of the situation on his own, whereas the rest of the book is, well, yeah, the people at the house are in kind of a collectivist, fighting over leadership and who's going to run this operation kind of thing. So it's interesting, and you're seeing it from multiple angles. And then Charlotte, we haven't really talked about her that much, but she's in a whole other sort of story, which is kind of a two-hander for the most part, and trying to figure out, like, well, maybe there's a few opportunities here. Maybe I should think about changing some things. So those different attitudes towards self-reliance or the group dynamic, I think is really interesting. So good job. I liked it a lot.
I'm so glad to hear that you liked Kyle. I'd like to ask you a bit more about that, actually, because the early readers who read the book had the most trouble with Kyle. I mean, he is very flawed, and I think some people had trouble moving beyond his flaws. But what appealed to you about him? Can you talk a little more about that?
He's actually pretty well prepared for that situation, and there is a sort of enjoyment in seeing someone get a little bit of comeuppance, but also kind of rise above it. So, he kind of deserves a little bit of what happens to him, but maybe not everything. But also you see him, faced with long odds, and he's able to survive. And it's enjoyable. Had he been just a sort of stereotypical good guy, it wouldn't have been as interesting, because he's not really conflicted. He would be completely at the mercy of the elements. Whereas Kyle, he also has to reckon with his own problems upstairs too, So he's multi-layered. So I always look forward to his chapters. I liked all of the chapters, but I was just curious to see what he would be up to a lot of the time. And like I said earlier, I do like that he's the only one who can actually see the full devastation. He's not locked into a pretty small view of things. He's got access to the full picture, which, like the reader, we do too. So you have a little sampler for our listeners of the book. Do you want to set that up?
Sure. I'm going to read briefly from the very beginning of the book, actually. This is the prologue that kind of sets up the whole story. I don't think it needs much more introduction than that, really.
No, that's its job. It is the introduction.
Yeah. 1 minute, you're at your spot in the enormous kitchen. A chrome and leather stool at one end of the gleaming granite island. The desert island, you privately call it. You're alone there so often, you may as well be marooned. Down island, a clamshell. Actually, a laptop. Slim, silver, screen gone black. The only sign that another human has crossed this strip of land. The human, your mother, who abhors crumbs and unrinsed coffee cups, drips and stains, crusts of toast, all the messes of human life. Your mother, who moves through each day, leaving no trace other than some random electronic device. Hurricane Charlotte, Dad calls her, a strange name for someone who glides cold and robot-like through life. Your mother, who never listens, who doesn't understand the first thing about you, who's too oblivious to even know that she doesn't know. 1 minute, you're sitting there, empty Mountain Dew can at your elbow, the drink having edged you into another reluctant day, along with the fatty, sweet Bitsu Bitsu May made fresh this morning. Breakfast of champions, Dad said when he strolled in. He swiped a couple of the chewy donuts himself, trailed sugar like white sand all the way to the kitchen island. Your mother glared. 1 minute, you're on your stool, on your phone, scanning Instagram posts from Rebecca Lee, who used to hang out with you. You'd go to the mall, split a frozen yogurt, one topping your choice, one hers, get high, steal nail polish, steal once a pair of jeans you shoved under your jacket when Rebecca said, no way, you never would. Rebecca, now a stuck-up slut who has quit talking to you. It's not like she's the only one. Lots of people won't acknowledge you now. You creep along the hallway outside Chem Lab, which used to be your spot between classes. You owned that spot. and your so-called friends fold into a tight, whispering knot. No words for you. You angle toward your place in the cafeteria, the table where you've sat for the past 2.5 years, and find every chair occupied. In class, it doesn't matter which one, the person in front of you hands papers back without turning all the way. When you enter the washroom, you clear the place out. It's fine. They talked about this in group. Reintegration, they called it. Also, redrawing. It's hard for the people in your life to redraw you. They want to see the same you they've always seen. The group counselor, Drayton, too earnest and granola for your liking, though he always gave you respect, would trace a rectangle in the air with his forefinger. For most people, he said, the world is a tidy box. Step outside the box, disturb their sense of order, and they feel profoundly uncomfortable. When that happens, you've got to remember that discomfort is their problem, not yours. Redrawing, you like that idea. 1 minute, your earbuds are pulsing Taylor Swift, a not bad song years ago when it came out, the video with all the ballet dancers, now just lame, an embarrassing scrap of childhood, like the frilly canopy bed you hung onto until you were 15 and woke up one day to realize you were no one's princess. Time to make a new playlist. Taylor Swift is so yesterday. 1 minute, you're on your desert island, scrolling, looking for a better, more meaningful song, a more mature song, one that suits your mood this boring Tuesday morning, wondering if you should post something about that skanky Rebecca Lee because you know stuff about her no one else knows, or if you should just let it go, the way you're learning to let things go. The next minute, how? You're on your ass. The heavy stool you were sitting on tipped over beside you. What? Pots and pans sail off copper hooks, crash all around you, bounce. Holy shit, Dad? Instinct kicks in. Make yourself small. You curl up like a snail. Hold your bandaged hand close to your belly. Be a snail, be a snail. Only you've never had a shell. The blender flies off the granite island, smashes onto the terracotta floor. Glass sprays. Another bar stool falls. Dad! You wait. Wire taut, every nerve screaming, run. But you don't. It's the one thing you're not supposed to do. Below the treble of smashing glass and clanging metal, a bass line builds like no sound you've ever heard before. Deep, rolling thunder, but louder, close. A jumbo jet landing on the roof. You wait, terrified. You wait like you've waited for so much in life, to be understood, to matter. You wait for everything to end, for something else to begin.
There we go. Things are not looking too good for our main characters, so and it's only going to get worse.
Scary stuff. Can you imagine that being flung off your stool? You know, there are things we take for granted, right? Like you and I were sitting in our chairs right now.
Yeah.
We're having this conversation, everything that we take for granted, that the earth is still under our feet, that we are where we are, that we have control over our bodies and our movements, and then to suddenly have all of that change.
So you have got an event coming up later this month. Do you want to tell our listeners about it?
Yeah, sure. On Tuesday, the 29th of March, starting at 7 p.m. Pacific time, I'm part of a regional spotlight event that's being hosted by the Federation of BC Writers. And that evening, they're shining the spotlight on the North Shore of the Vancouver area. So there are 4 North Shore writers who are going to be reading from their books and talking a little bit about writing and so forth. So that's an online event, and it's free registration for anybody. You don't have to be in BC. It can be anywhere.
Cool.
So simplest thing is just go to the website of the Federation of BC Writers, which is bcwriters.ca, and the event will be posted there.
Yeah, I'll put a link in the show notes too, so you could just go there on your phone and grab it. And yeah, keep an eye on our social media for upcoming events. Planning them is very difficult right now, but we do hope to have some events going into spring and the summer. But thanks so much for coming on the show today, Frances.
My pleasure, Matt. Thanks for having me.
Great. So that's Matt Bose signing off from New West Press Audio.